Succession Season 4, Episode 8, America Decides is over, but we are just getting started here on Post Show Recaps. That's right, it's the Succession podcast here on Post Show Recaps, where we're breaking down the HBO show's final season, episode by episode, and podcast by podcast. You can get commercial-free versions of the Succession podcast when you sign up at patreon.com/postshowrecaps at any level. That's patreon.com/postshowrecaps at any level for the commercial-free versions of the Succession podcast. Hello, everybody. I am Josh Wigler. Today, we are talking about the anti-penultimate episode of Succession. It's America Decides. I am joined here by my two co-hosts, Jess Sterling and Grace Leader. Grace, doesn't it make a Succession podcast so much more interesting when you're in it?
Yeah, when you're in it, yeah. I'm excited to chat. I thought this episode was fire, just like a Wisconsin voting station.
Just like that wasabi in our eyes.
That's right, Jess. Yeah.
Jess, how are you feeling? Jess, I really appreciated you coming to Greg in the hallway. That was a nice thing that you did.
Really interesting scene, honestly.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy I have my hint of lemon LaCroix, as one does.
Are you actually drinking a LaCroix right now?
No, I'm drinking a Polar Seltzer Orange Vanilla, but for the bit,
Yeah. Well, not a bit. I did have sushi tonight for dinner, and this
bodega
episode,
sushi
from a bodega. Yeah.
This episode made me think twice about it. I should have just stuck to spaghetti and olive oil. Maybe my stomach wouldn't be in knots. But I feel like the food isn't the problem. Grace, a harrowing episode of Succession here. Of course, major spoilers ahead. If you're wandering into this one, you haven't watched America Decides, it is going to be hard to proceed any further without really diving right into it. That's your warning. Now you're into it. We have a new president, kind of, or at least we have ATN calling it for Jared Mencken, a terrifying night of an HBO drama, Grace.
Well, the thing I'm interested in, Josh, I know we don't want to talk about the timeline, but that lady beside Tom said it's going to take 3 months to litigate. So now we got 3 months to fit into 2 more episodes. That's tough.
Give us season 5, you cowards. Jess, season 5.
We have more of this. We have more of this one.
Yeah. This was such a rough episode to watch. I mean, it's one of those ones where I don't hate the episode. Like, it was a really brilliant episode of television that didn't prevent my stomach from hurting the entire time watching it, and not in a good way.
I think that was because of bodega sushi. Yeah,
I think it probably was, to be totally honest with you. All right, well, let's cover what's coming up in the podcast this week. Of course, this is the first shot at America Decides. It shall not be the last, but we are live immediately after the episode. We are on postshowrecaps.com/YouTube with a really great crowd. If you're here, you want to give us live feedback on the podcast, we'll get to it as we go. Following the live recap, we're going to be getting the deep dive with Grace and Dr. Amanda. Grace, anyone coming onto the podcast this week?
Yeah, election expert, young manners, your son himself, Phil T. is coming on the pod.
I am thrilled to hear this. Thrilled T.
I'm just going to keep calling him an elections expert. He's Canadian, so I don't think.
Well, it might be helpful to have the outside opinion twice over on the deep dive to see how all of that's going. So the deep dive is coming. Versus with Latanya is coming. Shenanigans with Rob coming as well. We will try to really do our best to keep it light in a very dark episode of Succession. I think Rob and I can handle it. I think it'll be fine. Of course, we'll close out the week with the wrap-up show on Friday. That'll also be on YouTube. postshowrecaps.com/YouTube is the way to watch that. These videos on VOD, so you can always go back and watch it if you're not able to join us live. So that's what we've got going on the podcast this week. Jess, are you ready for a quick plot recap of America Decides?
Yes, please.
Here we go. Season 4, episode 8, America Decides, but did it really? It's election night on Succession, and it's total chaos the whole way through, like a glob of wasabi in the eye with a side of lemon LaCroix. Early projections place Democrat Daniel Jimenez ahead of the Republican nominee Jared Mencken. Sensing the potential loss, Mencken summons Rome to his New York headquarters, where they agree on a victorious narrative even if Mencken loses. Together, they'll go far, over the road and into the bar. With that said, Roman sees it as an opportunity to change the tide towards Mencken, thanks to a fire in Milwaukee that incinerates a significant amount of absentee ballots, casting Wisconsin's electoral fate in a shadow of uncertainty. Rome pushes hard to call the state for Mencken and meets resistance from Shiv, who's deeply concerned about how a Mencken presidency would not just be a nightmare, but the nightmare, plausible in a decadent era, saying the bad shit and believing it. At the center of the conflict is Kendall, whose heart wants to side with Jimenez, but is ultimately compelled by his drive to hang on to his father's business. Rome secures a promise from Mencken to kill the Gojo deal, and with that on the table, it's getting increasingly harder for Ken to say no. So he implores Shiv one last time to make a call to the Jimenez campaign and come back with a similar promise. But Shiv does not call the Jimenez campaign. She pretends to call the Jimenez campaign, and Ken finds out very, very quickly, and it's very, very bad. It's now all on the table. Shiv's in league with Matsson, working behind her brother's back, and that's enough for Kendall to make a call of his own. He's going to back Roman's play for Mencken. Having already made the controversial call of Wisconsin going to Mencken, and after Arizona goes red, ATN calls the election for Mencken, with little more than the promise of legal battles standing between the boogeyman and the White House. Any regrets, Kendall? So far, none. He's a guy we could do business with, he says to himself at one point, and he closes out the episode with the cold-blooded line, "Some people just can't cut a deal." Oh, I almost forgot. Connor Roy lost. Alas, Kentucky. Alas, Vanity. And alas, that is the quick recap of America Decides, Jess.
This is so brutal hearing it all recapped.
Mhm.
That's what happened. It's so brutal.
It would
And
be
it's
weird if
like-
that's not what happened. Josh.
What if I
Yeah.
just described a totally different episode of Succession?
If you give
Uh,
a mouse a cookie. No. But the thing is this episode really is like, hey, we know you've been enjoying Roman and like you've been sympathizing with him and you have empathy for him. Let's not forget he's a fascist. And even Shiv, the person who like you wanna like root for. I mean, she also has ulterior motives for wanting Jimenez to win. It's not because she she does like democracy. It's not that. It suits her interests as well. So it's really hard in an episode like this where like, who are we to root for really? When everyone is just so awful. And I know they're always awful all the time, but like this episode, it's especially bad.
Grace, it's a good reminder that they're like garbage people, and the question of like, who do I root for? It turns out that the answer is no one.
Yeah, the collapse of ATN, I think, right? That's
Right.
what caused the whole thing. I think that the politics stuff, this is another, I think 2 episodes in a row where I was feeling like throughout the episode, I was like, I don't know if I'm loving this. And then I feel like they managed to tie it back into everything in a way that is pretty compelling. I think that the end of this episode, when Shiv fakes the call to Nate and has just had this very heartwarming conversation that is so sweet and got my hopes up that like, oh, are we heading towards some sort of Kendall and Shiv thing? Which like, I know we have 2 episodes left. So like not the whole time, but maybe at the end of this episode that like Ken does the right thing for his daughter who's been pushed by a Ravenhead supporter. And then Shiv doesn't call, she doesn't try. And he finds out, and Greg gives like a fine wine, he uncorked the bottle and Kendall drank from it, and he does this decision, and he sticks to like, even to himself, he's like talking to himself. And this is where I was kind of like, oh, he's not Logan, because the theory has been, is he becoming Logan? And then I'm like, maybe he's not. Maybe he has a little bit more of a heart. I know Shiv all episode is trying to say like, even Logan would have defended democracy.
Yeah.
But by the end, he's in the car saying, no, it's all about the deal. It's business. You got to do business, even if it's at the expense of your child's safety and their well-being. So I think he's very much like Logan. And I thought all of that, and a little bit of I think a good episode title for this would have been Roman's Got His Groove Back.
Roman's got his groove back.
Yeah.
An alternate title, perhaps. Yeah, I think that this was a very important episode of the show. I think it's very rightly going to be an episode that is enraging, is going to leave people feeling very upset. I certainly had a lot of flashbacks to the last couple couple of elections and what it's been like to go through those nights here in the United States. It was really very, very, very difficult. And I think it was an important reminder about sort of the central idea of this show. It's, anything for power, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that is sort of the big thing that happens. And sometimes this show, and actually frequently this show, surprises you. And as I say on a lot of these conversations, like, it expands your empathy well. Like, if you could feel bad for someone like Kendall, or you can feel bad for Shiv, or you can feel bad for Tom or Roman, these people who are pulling the levers of the world, who have their fingers on the nuclear codes, effectively, as Jess Jordan puts it, then that really, I think, is a testament not just to the writing, but the human condition and your ability to find some common ground, even in the suffering of the people who make so many other people suffer. And then an episode like this sort of washes out the well, like drains the well, and is a very pivotal reminder of these people would literally watch the country burn if it came to it. In the case, certainly, of Roman, who doesn't care. Nothing happens, as he says.
Or Darwin's eyes.
Pure anarchy, yeah. While Darwin's eyes are burning. Pure anarchy from Roman. Shiv desperate not to see this situation turn towards the Mencken, but not so desperate that she won't put that in front position to her own desire to sit on the throne via her Matsson deal. And then Kendall, who has always been the woke bae Kendall, right? Saying that he's out here, F the patriarchy.
Yeah.
He is the liberal one who you could root for and all of this stuff. Kendall ultimately siding with the person that they can do business with because they've secured a deal. These people have put the power above absolutely everything else. And we are rightly, I think, as an audience, infuriated by the actions of basically every single character in this episode. Makes it really difficult to watch, makes it very hard to weather. But I think we lose sight of that aspect of the show at our own peril, Grace, as we try to sort of apply what is Succession telling us about society? What are we supposed to glean from this? What are we supposed to put forward?
I also feel like the thing that's happened a lot this season is this idea of like when Roman gets mad at Matsson on the mountain and people are like SEC violations, as like, yeah, I don't know if that's coming. And then there was the next week, all this stuff. And then this week, I feel like people are like, okay, is this going to be bad? I know there's like a loss, potentially these lawsuits coming, but they gave us the timeline that it's 3 weeks, and we know next episode is the funeral. So it's like,
and they said the funeral's tomorrow. So yeah,
funeral's tomorrow.
Here's
right?
another day. Yep.
So I feel like on top of, I think you're very correct that it's like, what will these people do for power? And it's literally anything to get them ahead. It really almost anything. And then on top of that, it's like, and what consequences do they face for like destroying democracy? Basically none. Basically none.
Currently,
it feels like,
right?
Yeah.
Like you can hope.
I don't know if that's the show though. I don't know.
But I don't know that it's this show either. And certainly with 2 episodes left, I think that this is it's hard to see. I mean, it's not too hard to see the path for some of these people. Tom took a humongous reputational hit if you were paying attention at the end of the episode.
I felt very personal and direct.
Yeah. Basically the premature call for Mencken from ATN just to keep up with these 2 super far right outlets that were calling it for Mencken so that they couldn't be shut out of that conversation. Tom is on blast. His phone is red hot, is what we hear.
People hate him.
People who'd like to scream at him.
Yes. Lots of important people, Jess, I think, would like to scream about this episode of TV.
Yeah, it's really tough to watch as someone who like feels this very deeply of what we all went through as a country,
and could very well go through again.
Yes, it wasn't that long ago. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago that we all went through this. So it's really top of mind, of course, when we're watching an episode like this. And to basically have like the election in the hands of these super corrupt individuals is just so awful to watch. And on top of that, everything kind of unraveling between the siblings as well. I think it's so interesting to have Kendall in this kind of push-pull between Shiv and Roman. I don't know that we've seen him in that position very often. and Roman really trying to play the game of like top dog. He's trying to be the one, the decision maker in the room. And it's so fascinating. Again, like this episode's really hard to watch, but like when you look at the intricacies of it and how multidimensional and multifaceted all these relationships are and how difficult it is, where Kendall is both jealous of Roman because Mencken is now going to Roman, doesn't even want him in the room with any of the meetings, only wants to speak to Roman. Kendall doesn't like that. He wants to be solo CEO. He doesn't like that someone else is above him. And then on top of that, you have Shiv who, like, yes, does she believe in democracy? And actually, as a woman, I'm sure she's terrified of Mencken being in power. But there's also those other aspects of why she wants Jimenez to win. And of course, it has to do with the Matsson deal. So there's just like so many small things between them all. And Shiv trying to manipulate not even just Kendall in this episode, but in my opinion, also Tom, with the timing of the delivery of the news of their baby, really feels a bit like, hey, Tom, by the way, I'm having your baby. Maybe you want to work closely with me today
and save
like
democracy for your child, your unborn child.
That's
maybe.
exactly how it feels. And so it's really tough in it, but I love the layering of all these characters' intentions. And someone like Greg becomes is in a very pivotal spot this episode, because who knows what happens if Shiv actually offers him something besides to tear out his internal organs.
Yeah, well, that would be HBO leaning into its HBO-ness. Should we come to a point where Cousin Greg is literally eviscerated on Succession? I don't think it's what's going to happen. Let's talk through, I think, the siblings, and starting with Roman. This is a huge night for Roman Roy, Grace. I think it's a night where Roman himself, as far as what it is he wants out of this situation, he gets. He is in pole position with the siblings, and even Kendall recognizes Mencken's kind of his guy. A great night for Roman Roy if you're Roman Roy, and a horrible night for Roman Roy if you're like just about anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, two pretty not great episodes for Roman, backing out of the presentation and firing everybody, and not being able to convince Connor last episode to drop out, although apparently not too late for Connor to drop out of the election. And then who
do you think his running mates were? Do you think that they'll remain unnamed?
Yeah.
The Voldemorts of Connor Roy's presidential campaign.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Those jackrabbits. They betrayed him.
Was it just Jacqueline Rabbit?
It
is
could
it
be.
subtle? Like, yeah.
Did say it was a woman, so that would track.
Yeah, that's right. And then obviously the conversation with Jerry, not great for Roman Roy, and like the roller coaster ride of Succession, super high up on top of the mountain this episode. It does feel like, again, I like that feels not great. Like if I'm like almost tracking the edit of 2 episodes left to have such a good episode, and the fact that Jared Mencken got named president by ATN, but it seems like none of the other networks potentially called him winning. But very interesting. I think the one other thing too is there's always been this idea. I know I sort of joked that there's only one job that they all want, which is CEO of Waystar Royco, but it does feel like if there's a place for Roman in this world that we haven't really considered, it's like in like Republican politics seems to be where he's really just like, I got this stuff like sorted and locked. And I don't know that we have like 2 episodes left where he's going to explore that, other than maybe being like, I'm going to go work for Jared Mencken in the White House potentially. But although it seems like Jared wants him at
exactly. And I think for Roman, why leave his own kingdom when he is, if this does ultimately beat the legal system and end up installing Mencken as the president after what you imagine would be months of disputes, Roman's going to be feeling like he did just crown a president with a Coke, anointed with a Coke. It was Tom who was on Coke, not Roman, but anointed with a Coke all the same. And I feel like for Roman Roy, what he has demonstrated tonight, potentially by delivering this, natural disaster of election night coverage, is this is Hollywood Rome, right? Like this is the guy, this is where we've come a long way from Dr. Honk, the car that could like the doctor who could talk to cars. He, has talked about it in the past of like his vision for what an ATN would look like, of what they would do, Mencken as the star of the show, all that jazz. And he has realized that vision, at least for one night only. I think that there are I don't know. I think that one of the geniuses of the show right now, Jess, is that Logan Roy is dead and is not around to weigh in on everybody's decision. So it is kind of hard to know, like, would he have approved of Roman's sharkish behavior in this episode of basically what can the media do when it is completely without, scruples and integrity, and instead is just about self-interest. Roman Roy demonstrated something. I don't know if Logan would have been proud or not, but it feels like, it's certainly notable. Certainly notable.
Yeah, it's really tough when they're all saying, "Oh, God, or Dad would have done this, Dad would have done that."
Did you just Freudian slip?
I did
Dad
say
and God.
Yeah.
Wow. Logan Roy as God.
But it's tough because what would Logan have done in this situation?
There's conflicting opinions on this. Shiv thinks like this is even way too far for Logan.
Yeah. I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. I don't think he goes necessarily as far as Roman does in this situation.
Yeah.
But it's really tricky, and I think this is kind of Roman's final form. And if we're looking at the kind of the thinking forward to the funeral, I'm really intrigued.
He's in a speaker position.
Yeah. What is Roman gonna do? I'm so intrigued to watch this, because now we're also dealing with the fallout of them knowing Shiv was not on their side, because they barely addressed it, right? Like, they find out and then they call the election and then that's it. And you got to imagine there's going to be more fallout from that, especially if Shiv is not willing to give this up and is going to push against them. I can't imagine that that's the end of that.
Yeah.
It does also partly feel like, right, without Kendall finding out, I think even with Kendall just knowing that she didn't actually call Nate, it's really the nail in her coffin is him finding out that Shiv was working with Matsson. And I think that without him knowing that information, I think he leans with Shiv. Like, it really does feel like that is where he was leaning up until he finds out that she betrayed them, and that he can't trust anything she said that night, because all of it was in service to what she wanted, which is to work with Matsson and have the deal go through.
Yeah.
So
I audibly gasped when Kendall said, "Can you call Nate to see?" Like, I was like, "Wow, that is smart. That is to be like, we will like not we'll retract Wisconsin if you're like cut." That. I was like, "Wow, brilliant. Maybe it won't work, but whatever." And then she didn't call. She didn't even call.
Yeah. So what happens if she calls? Does Nate play ball? Does Jimenez play ball? Like, what happens? You don't know.
It seems like Ken might, like, he seems so shocked at the news and maybe doesn't even. Yeah, I wonder whether we get. I don't think we'll ever get confirmation, but
personally, based on Nate's prior statement of like, Jimenez is not Gil. I'm not Gil. You're not Logan. Like, we're not doing this. I don't think they're trying to make a deal. I feel like Jimenez probably thinks I still have the election, regardless of what is going on in Michigan, right? Like, it does feel like they probably feel that way. I can't imagine if Shiv feels so confidently that, like, I'm not even going to try to call. I feel like she probably knows the answer is no.
Yeah. Or else at least, if the answer is no and she just has to fake it. Gosh, she was the one who was calling it out in Living Plus about like, oh, Shiv spilled chocolate milk in the back seat. Yeah. And she can smell their bullshit. Gosh, Jess, when she says, "Don't call," and kind of like, why? Because he's busy.
It was so bad.
Yeah.
She's dealing with a lot, but like, she's not a great liar. And I think she's really under pressure right now, because I think rightfully so, she's very nervous about Mencken as president. And so she pulls, like, this is not a plan for her to have called. It's very last minute. She's not prepared for Kendall to want to also talk to Nate, which she probably should have known was coming, considering we talked about this, like, their relationship. Kendall and Nate would go way back. So it's not exactly surprising. But that scene, I got to say, I love in television when they don't allow us to hear anything. But we're from Shiv's perspective watching Kendall walk and then go talk to Greg, and
Yeah.
both of them taking turns looking at her. Absolutely excellent. One of my favorite scenes of the
Greg's
entire,
little
episode.
eyebrows when Greg revealed that he gave up the goods to Ken is pretty intriguing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure. So, well, let's keep talking through Kendall Roy. I think that we have been tracking that he has at least been angling for that crown for a couple of episodes now. He's invigorated by the Living Plus presentation. He's number one in the sand, if not in his dad's heart. And he is even, it's Kenny and Frankie. We're all back at it all over again. And now in this episode, there is this degree of uncertainty through so much of it that he doesn't know. He is pulled in these two different directions where he would like to think, I think, that he is one of the good guys, but even then he starts to question it. I don't know. I think maybe the poison drips down. Maybe we're just bad, and maybe we should just accept it. It's a really, really interesting episode for Kendall as well. One that kind of left me a little, I think I've been really leaning into the idea that Kendall becomes Logan, yada, yada, yada. Roman feels very Loganish in this episode, and it's almost like Kendall in this episode, a little too late, is like, gosh, this may have been too much. Yeah.
But then also at the same time, I feel like might be the episode that actually firmly entrenches him, that there's no going back, because those last two lines of like, couldn't get a deal done, he's a guy we can do business with. He knows when he try. I mean, I guess at the end of the episode, he is trying to call Rob, can I come over? Like,
He's
they
trying
are
to have his
totally
cake and eat
asleep.
it too, right? Like, that's exactly he's trying to pretend like, oh, I can go look at my kids and somehow that makes what I did today okay.
But she also, I think, the narrative around this whole thing already is starting to turn into some measure of rebellion, right? Like, you're catching wind of that by the end of the coverage, and all signs pointing to Tom Wamsgams, just ATN. And so, like, if you're closer and closer to the heart of it, certainly like Rava, and that Kendall is, just had his grandiose rant at her in the street, that whatever just happened to this questionable call, Kendall had fingerprints on it, if not the person who fully pulled back the lever. So I think Kendall, he's like, I'm a bad dad. Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
I think between, he knows he's now crossed the line. It's something that like Rava comes and speaks to him about. Is like, this is bad. Like, it's, like, your daughter is worried in the conversation again on the phone this episode. And then the Shiv, like what Kendall will see as betrayal, and he had sort of like, owned up to, whatever, I don't know what the language is, but said like, I've been thinking maybe I could do this all on me, but like, I don't know. And then when he finds out, she says, you're a good dude, and then he throws that back in her face. I do feel like there's the potential that this episode, in terms of like, we were talking about it before we started, like whether we liked it, and you said like it's really a thesis statement of the show, but I think this might be a real like planting of the flag of there's really no going back for Kendall in terms of how much he is Logan now. I wonder. There's hints of like he might, regret the way he's been acting the last few episodes. I don't know if he's coming back by the end of this episode.
Yeah, Jess, is there any coming back for Kendall Roy? Is there any coming back for any of them?
It doesn't. Gosh, I always want to have hope for Shiv, just because I don't know what it is about Shiv that I always want to hope that there's something there left for her. Not just because like she has so much on her plate right now. Like, she really is fighting, even if obviously there are layers, like she has self-interest in there as well, but she's never liked Mencken. Let's be fair. She has never liked Mencken from the moment she met him. She has always been against him as the option.
She did take the picture with him.
She did.
Which feels like whatever sort of like tour de force she's going to try and charm offensive or whatever, that photo is circulating.
Yeah. But I think on top of that, let's not forget, this is the same exact night she tells her husband, who they've been having issues, very obviously, she tells him she's pregnant with his kid, and he does not believe her. He
is it a
questions
tactic?
her.
Tactic?
Yeah.
Is
It's and now, like, the thing is like you understand why he thinks that, but it's one thing to think it and another thing to say it. And on top of that, for him to say, you killed your father, like, it is your fault he's dead.
Yeah, I
is
forgot he said that. Yeah.
so brutal.
It's sort of your fault he died.
And
Yeah.
She said that she came down the stairs, right? She says, "I think I killed him," and he has to be like, "No,
Yeah.
you didn't kill
And
him."
then like
And
to
he's
hear
like,
all of those things
"You
and then
killed him."
have to still fight for democracy on top of that, going up against Roman, who, let's be like, they're I love how, even though they're talking in this like very fancy, like well-written succession way, they're still siblings and they fight like siblings. Like when him being like, false flag, and she's
False
like,
flag.
you can't just say false
False
flag when
flag.
you don't want to hear it, and he just keeps saying it. Very siblingy and like very annoying.
Well,
Like,
Roman has always been able to, really get under Shiv's skin. When Shiv has like an actual point that she is fiercely trying to defend, Roman only reacts to it with ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-tas and just like interruptions and
Yep.
all of these ridiculous clownish gestures that are impossible to fight against because it's just bulldozers. It's just like you're the security guard in Austin Powers trying to stop the bulldozer from rolling you over, and you just can't. Well, that guy probably could, but Shiv can't when Roman gets in that thing. Some of that was really, really tough to watch, was the way that Roman was treating Shiv.
And she's called hysterical multiple times by multiple characters. Like, let's just throw that out. It is not okay to call a woman hysterical. Like,
don't
it
do
is.
that.
It is not an okay word to say, just because it's like, it really is the same exact thing as like a woman is upset and suddenly, oh, do you have your period? It's the same exact thing. It's so supremely frustrating to watch it. And it happens multiple times this episode. Like one time Tom says it, and of course Kendall jumping in like he does when Logan hits Roman. Hey, no. And then he does it later. And it is like so, and obviously this is done on purpose, but I was so angry on Shiv's behalf of like, how dare you?
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of feedback from this already here in the chat. Procrastinating law student, maybe tell us like what these legal battles are going to look like. Procrastinating law student, we'd love to know.
Yeah.
I just hope you talk about Kendall defending Shiv when Tom inferred she was unhinged, then doing the same. This whole episode was so hard to watch in terms of Shiv being reduced to a hysterical woman. Yes, Kendall, then like when Kendall first says, "You watch it, Tom," it was such a great moment. It was when Kendall claps back against Logan, right? When he's like, "Don't you hit him?" He has had these moments where even he has like intense loyalty to a cause, that there is some decency that breaks through when people are treating each other horribly in the family. And then Grace, he just does end up going and doing the same exact thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to be fair to Tom. They're all awful and they're all bad. Also, she does go and approach him on a night where it's like, so the night before, he's like very tired. They have a fight. She does apologize. I will say she does apologize, but then it's also like, okay, I've apologized. Will you also now apologize, please?
Yeah, it doesn't feel sincere when you are apologizing, expecting an apology back. And also like her even pulling him aside on this night feels so tactical that like, it does. No one is innocent. No one is doing anything out of the kindness of their hearts. But even still, the reaction he has to finding out he's going to be a father is certainly not
bad.
ideal.
It's bad. Well, he is gacked out of his mind on coke, is the phrase that Justin Kirk used when I interviewed him for this episode. So I do have an interview. I do have an interview with Jared Mencken himself, Justin Kirk, up at thr.com right now. So you can read that whenever you want. postshowrecaps.com/thr will take you to my author page there. Gacked out on coke was the very Justin Kirky delivery of that take. A really, really fun conversation with him about playing a terrible guy. And Justin Kirk's take on Jared Mencken is like, yeah, he believes everything he's talking about. So scary. Yeah, and he warns at the end of the interview. I told him, this is very triggering. This is very triggering. He said it is, and there's more to come.
So one of the things too, I think this show, there's all this talk always like, who's Logan Roy based off? It's like, yeah, like probably Rupert Murdoch, but also like then also anybody else who fits the narrative at the time. And I feel like one of the things that just like why this episode was also probably very hard, not just because we know that like the last 2 elections have sucked, but also it was things like it's like both elections mixed into a little pot to be like, yeah, be as kind of like awful and as satirical of like the and reflective of the culture, because the like, the like awful guy just appearing on the and going to be president for the first time, but maybe he's really bad for democracy. It feels very 2016. Not that it's also not 2020. But then also the like Wisconsin stuff and the voting, like that feels very much like fake election, whatever. Just say the lie, just get
escalations, right? Escalations of our current circumstances. And this was another thing that I talked to Justin Kirk about, where it's like he mentioned it's like it was really weird watching this episode. He'd watched it, a couple days ago. He's like, I watched it the day after the Trump town hall on CNN, and how this was like a very dispiriting thing, the feeling of watching this episode in light of that. And I talked to him about how like this show is often so eerie with how prescient it is, that this isn't an episode that just feels evocative of elections past, but is a warning of where things could go. And he described it as Succession isn't a mirror of right now, but it is a look at 5 minutes later, basically. And so I think a lot of the ways in which this episode played out, if they felt like, oh God, that could never happen. Who knows? Who knows anymore?
I think it's very strange how much there's like, it feels like there's like Dominion voting stuff, and that would have been impossible for them to, other than like the stuff came out after it had filmed and was being aired. So it's like, and so it is eerie how like, well, I guess just because like it all is awful.
Yeah.
Everything is awful.
What's not awful is we've got a lot of people here in the chat with some feedback. So I would love to bring some of that feedback in now as we are continuing to talk about this episode of Succession. The great Tom Palmer writing and saying, my Mother's Day prediction was right. Shiv told Tom.
Yeah.
How about this? Another HBO Mother's Day surprise. I felt like there were a bunch of these on Game of Thrones once upon a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Misa of it all.
It's just like, not exactly a great Mother's Day moment.
Yeah.
Not the best. Trap?
Not the best. This was a really interesting comment, I thought, from Fisher Protocol. We are watching Logan's origin story. Does that feel like what this final arc is to you?
I think so. I think as soon as I feel like when that theory started floating around, I was like, Kendall's becoming Logan. It's hard not to see it. But not just Logan. And I think to the idea where you said earlier, like Logan's not around anymore, but now there's like 3 Logans. It's like terrifying and scary. He's created 3 of them who are just out in the world and butting heads, but also like, yeah, it's not fun, I think.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. We are getting some takes in the chat about a character who we have not talked all that much about, and that would be Gregory Peggery, as Mattson calls him. Jojo Joker writes in, Greg continues to inch his way to the top. Royco is a news organization, and Greg Roy has the inside scoop. Season 1, episode 1 foreshadowed all of this. Glad to see my multi-year predictions are coming to pass. We had a couple of other thoughts on Greg in this episode and his positioning within it. We had this from Chloe, who said, are we going to talk about how Greg was made to dance with an old man who was confused
The
and
Tom
did
head
not
tilt
want
is
to dance?
so funny. What?
I just have to say, as difficult as this episode was to watch, and it very much was, I did enjoy a lot of the comedic bits. I thought they were really well timed and really well placed throughout the episode. It felt like again, Greg and Tom are both terrible people. I don't need to tell you this. We all know it. But like they had their like Tom and Greg stuff back happening.
Greg trying to fake doing coke was, I thought, very
good.
But and I like the two of them sort of just like both peeking out from the whiteboard. Gosh, everything with the touchscreen, by the way.
Oh,
unreal.
yeah, so good.
On the touchscreen.
Yeah,
I'm down to my last touchscreen.
Absolutely ridiculous.
The wasabi bit and the.
But Greg Greg doesn't like that he's being asked to
No.
Greg for Tom.
That's right.
And in this moment when he's being asked to Greg for Tom, Greg is trying to precede this conversation by saying, "Can we have like a strategy session? Mattson's treated me pretty terribly. He's made me drink things that are not typically thought of as drinks.
Blood?
Yeah, could be a blood smoothie.
Like what? I was
Drink
trying
my
in my
blood.
head.
Drink,
literally-
like you can see it.
I was
That
gonna send this to
scene-
Ebba, but if you want to drink it,
Yeah.
you can.
We could
You know?
defrost it, you know.
But he's trying to ask Tom, like, what should I do? Mattson treats me terribly, but I think I might have an in. And like very quickly, Tom doesn't really want to deal with any of that. His constitution, his like internal organs is a part of the fabric of America. He even asks, I believe it's Darwin, who I don't have the name of the actor in front
Oh,
of me.
it's
but
Adam Godley. I looked
he's,
it up. Yeah.
He's terrific. He has this
So funny.
tendency of showing up in the final season of a
Yeah.
thing in a very
Hey.
pivotal role. So great to see him here. But Tom asks Darwin, like, do you think like diapers? Like, well, like, are we going to have time?
Yeah.
And Darwin's like, yeah, we make time for the bathroom on election
Notably,
day."
I loved Darwin. I have to say, as a
Fun.
one episode character, kind of reminds me of when Roman is in the management
Jack Cherry
training.
Jones, yeah.
Yeah, Zach Cherry Jones kind of reminds me of that. I loved Darwin. I thought Darwin
Yeah.
was so excellent, as like we immediately knew who this character was. He's wearing sneakers, like he's gonna be comfy. He's very much
Not
against
comfrey.
yes, very much against calling it early. The wasabi in the eye bit absolutely killed me.
But
I loved
again,
his
sort
role.
of like the numbers guy, right? Like
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right.
The cool new rule has
Yeah.
circulated. You can't say no. You can't say no. So Darwin does not want to do it. He wants to make sure that it's at least couched as pending and he can
Mhm.
explain all of the numbers, but it's not couched as pending. And when he is, you hear about he wants to go and he wants to give like his annotations basically. And Tom's like, no time for that. So Darwin, any sense of sort of like a sober presence in the room, it's flushed down the drain. And it also just kind of seems like Darwin eventually relents. I'm surprised that he doesn't get medevaced ultimately from the
Yeah.
episode. I definitely thought that there was a world where similar to the therapist in Austerlitz,
Yeah.
he's just going to get yanked.
Yeah,
be
Could have been good.
We're-
Procrastinating law
yeah.
student is back to say that, well, the only legal take
Yeah.
I can give is that ATN's reporting has an eerie similarity to the Dominion case. And considering the fallout from Dominion, Tom should rightfully be concerned. I think that, this show, if it's on the timeline that it's on and we've got 2 days-ish left, I think really what you'll get mostly is insinuations, but Grace.
An epilogue? You went down for my epilogue theory? I think I talked about this with Rob, where it's like we get the at the end of a movie where we get the little like this is what they're up to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they're all just like in jail or whatever.
Well,
I'm
I,
s-
I definitely can imagine a final episode that takes place pretty
way later.
takes place
Yeah.
sometime later for sure. And I think like it would make a lot of sense to me that we are relatively linearly starting at Logan's birthday and ending at Logan's funeral, and then
Yeah.
episode 10 is sometime
Basically the epilogue.
later. Yeah, which means in some ways, sort of in true HBO fashion, we
Episode-
are probably heading into a buzzsaw with the penultimate episode next week.
fascinating.
I feel like we'd have to. Yeah, I still I'm still thinking they're gonna have the Kendall killed the cater waiter storyline, and I think it's gonna be in the final episode. We all know the final episode is an hour and a half, so they do have a little bit more time to address some stuff. I just can't imagine them leaving that on the table, and they might. But it just feels like it is something that needs to be wrapped up. And I don't know how we wrap Kendall's story without that piece.
Yeah.
And so, like, maybe it is sometime in the future, and that's when it all kind of leaks, and maybe all this stuff leaks, or most of it. There are
No
many
leaks. No leaks.
Yeah, no
No
leaks.
No
Like,
leaks.
I got
We're in the
information.
room.
No one tell anybody. Every person tells everybody. Everyone they talk to.
Immediately.
Bravo. Everyone. Matson. Everyone gets the information.
Yeah. I don't know. Who knows if does does he just get away with it? I don't know. I don't know where it's going to end up going. This is from Chloe. Chloe says, Kendall's the worst. He's been going behind the siblings' backs since the beginning of their pact, lying to Shiv at every opportunity. So the hypocrisy is overwhelming here. It really does feel like pot calling the kettle black in that scene in the conference room.
They've all done it. They're all doing it. It's like you're playing the game. Recognize that you're playing the game. It's they always treat Shiv differently, and it always annoys me. Shiv is always held to a different standard, and it's upsetting.
Yeah, for sure. Continuing on, Brendan Fitzpatrick's out here saying, listen, there's a world where this entire episode was a farce. Mencken doesn't actually win, and they just royally effed this one up, and it ruins their company and their space. So the possibility on the table, Grace, that they are already just about to completely blow it by the move that they've made here, that they're hoisting themselves by their own petard. And yet, I think ultimately, I maybe side with this from the Fisher Protocol, says I think part of the main thesis is that these people do all of this with no consequences.
Like I think the biggest consequence you get is like, I mean, the show is called Succession. So the biggest loss that specifically the three of them can have is not running Waystar Royco, essentially, right? And I think that, you know, there's a world where, like, I know Schrodinger's presidency was on the table tonight, but Schrodinger's deal, because the deal is still, I cannot believe that, like, in episode 2, you're like, you know, well, the deal is on or the deal is off. By next episode, we'll know. And literally, this episode is about whether or not who becomes president determines whether the deal is on or off. Right. And I feel like that has to be a thing. Next episode, I'm very interested in terms of a funeral, because it always feels like every episode is always, like, especially when it's family stuff, which are some of my favorite, when it's a like family dinner or whatever, but then also like how is business, they just can't help but also be doing business all the time. So will they be doing that at Logan's Logan's funeral, and then be like gaslighting themselves to be like, but dad would have wanted me to be completing the deal at his funeral, you know?
For sure. So it's, I think, very relevant, this bit of feedback from Styx. What's up, Styx? Who will be murdered at the funeral?
Well, you'll find out. You'll know on the feedback on the wrap up show, because you'll do who got killed that week. So somebody's gonna get killed.
Who's gonna get fired? Who's gonna get actually killed? These are questions Frank's that we have. I mean, in Frank's dead, it's, you know, Logan's whole funeral, so I think, like, he's still dead.
Sometimes it's like people's reputation,
correct.
Or you know.
But when there is a dead body in the room, like, it's a little hard not to vote for the dead body in that.
But he already got one. He already probably.
I know.
Yeah, he already got one for that.
I know. With that being said, like, who is going to have the fumble in next week's episode? My eyes are really squarely on Roman Roy right now, and it certainly seems like the marketing tools are as well. The trailer for this next episode was very Roman-centric. Roman monologuing over the whole thing, Roman practicing the speech that he's going to give. And so my questions are, like, is he fueled by the success that he has had on election night? Is he galvanized by his future alliance with the president of the United States? Is he going to give this very, very chilling speech that's going to solidify his positioning against Kendall and Shiv? Or is he going to somehow blow it? Or is he going to somehow finally kind of get undercut by one of his other siblings? So I think a lot of these roads pass through Roman, total football Roman Roy style.
Yeah, it does feel like, I know I always talk about how cocky Kendall annoys me, but cocky Roman is terrifying. And I do think he's at an all-time high right now, right? Like,
Tom was on an all-time high, I think.
And Greg. It brings me back to when he is calling his father, right? And he's leaving him a voicemail, and he's saying, like, hey, you don't have to worry about, like, all those other, I got you. It's just me. You're number one, right? It feels very similar. Like, he feels like this is what dad would have wanted. I'm now dad. Look at me go. And it's a little scary. I do think, I know we already had kind of the, like, pre-grieving come to bite him with on the mountain with Matsson. I don't think we're done with that yet. I don't know that. I think we might get more of Roman grieving, and it might hit him like a sack of bricks at the funeral.
Yeah.
definitely
Who
see
knows? Who knows? We are a week away from finding out, but we are just getting started on the week of episode 8 here, covering Succession. So the deep dive is what is coming next. After that, you're getting the Versus podcast against Yellow Jackets with me and LT. I'll talk to Rob. We'll do the wrap-up show. So the whole thing is really just getting started, as we say here on Post-Show Recaps. You want to get involved, you can subscribe to the podcast. That would be great. Post-Show Recaps Succession, wherever you get your podcasts, or postshowrecaps.com/succession if you want to search by URL. That is the RSS link. If you want the commercial-free versions, as we said at the top, patreon.com/postshowrecaps. You sign up at any level, and you are going to get commercial-free versions of the Succession podcasts. This was a big one. I'm still like a little bit flummoxed. Grace, you got anything else you want to add before we call it for the evening?
No, I do think again, I thought that kind of like in the middle, I thought it maybe at times meandering, but I think that this show really knows how to, make it all sing and work together. And by the end of this episode, I thought there was a really compelling, like last third of the episode that really, I think, sets up the last two episodes actually really, really well. Because one of the things we talked about, I feel like, in terms of Roman, this is the thing I wanted to say with Roman being on such a high, but he has been the person who I think, in my opinion, has been the most committed to the Roys being a thing, the Sibs. I feel like but now that Kendall has called out Shiv, but Shiv also knows, because Kendall told her that Ken wants to do it by himself. That is out there that Shiv can now use to pit Roman. So it just feels like they're all going to be against each other
at their dad's funeral.
At their dad's funeral.
Yeah.
So that should be fun.
That should be fun, Jess. Fun is definitely the word.
Yeah.
Fun is a word.
Yeah.
It's in funeral.
Yeah.
Put the fun
Not
in
wrong.
funeral.
This is correct.
No, yeah, I do think I am gonna rewatch this probably at least a couple times, but I do think it's an episode that probably after the first it was very hot the first time I watched it, and it was very tense. And
Your TV was red hot. A lot of
TV
angry
was
people.
red hot.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a little bit easier to digest on future viewings, and I'll be able to pick up on a little bit more because it was just like, oh my god, my stomach hurts.
Well, the episode was wasabi, and it was in your eyes, right? Like it was just putting wasabi in your eyes and making it really burn to watch this one. I think certainly for a lot of people. And I count myself as one of them. So it was a difficult and challenging episode of the show. This is just our first shot at it. We'll have plenty more to say as the week progresses. Grace is next on the deep dive. Grace, where can people find you otherwise?
You can find me at Hi from Grace.
Jess, how about yourself?
You could find me at the Jess Sterling.
All right, I'm at Round Howard, and here for the first of the many episode recaps of Succession Season 4, Episode 8, I leave you with F off! Good night, good luck,